Hey y'all, I am Victor E, and I help provide insight to empower. And today, as I was connecting to my heart, to source, there was a big stream of consciousness that came in, that's been coming in, but that was being withheld from sharing. But I felt very called and very compelled to share today. And that was about what on a spiritual level was the deal, what's the deal with the Trump presidency and the woundedness that needed to be addressed during that time, what we're going into, and what COVID is helping us to see and to release today. And so the tip about the Trump presidency was that our nation as a collective entity within the relationship that we have, the interrelationship that we have with other countries, was like a fever. It was like our body, like the country was a body or a part of the body of Gaia, of Earth. And it was all that hate and all that ignorance was being brought to the collective consciousness to be witnessed. And in witnessing and seeing it and hearing it, it helps kickstart, jumpstart the healing process, which was kind of already underway. The healing process is inclusive of the racial turmoil that we've seen with Black people, with Native Americans, and just people of color in general. We saw this swelling, this mobilization, this weaponization of hatred and ignorance being brought to the forefront. Because it's one thing to read about it in the history books with that sort of naive, childlike mentality of like, wow, that's some stuff to have happened. Thank God it's over, right? There's a lot of that in the collective of like, oh, well, thank God, we're not going through that. That was them. This is us today. We're different today. Even though we're seeing we're not that different today. So it's hard to say it this way, but like we get to see a lot of the healing on a spiritual level, the spiritual level being all encompassing of the mental, emotional, and physical. It's kind of like a non-local way of thinking it, where the mental, emotional, and physical is taking place across space and time. But on the spiritual level, this stuff was just always happening. It's ongoing. The patterns that we're seeing are not so much cyclical in terms of being a circle. It's more like a spiral, right? I would say that this mobilization and weaponization of hatred and ignorance that we saw taking place and that we're still feeling the aftershocks of is part of the upward cycle of releasing these lower density energies that the planet is carrying, the wounds of its creation. And it's what we're seeing today is a manifestation of that in sort of human terms. So in the human way of seeing things, there are nasty people doing nasty things, and we have to, fight against it. On another level, more like a macro spiritual level, we're all, like, life itself is moving through these dimensions, these planes of existence, these dense energies And in moving through them, because we are naturally beings of love, when we move through the dense energies, when you move through grief, through sadness, through frustration, through anger, through these lower density energies, because you are the love, you're witnessing it, you're hearing yourself, is raising the vibrational frequency and healing these wounds. So in moving through a lot of that ugliness, where maybe a more loving candidate would have been, someone other than Trump, whoever that is in your mind. In moving through that, it was necessary. It had purpose, insofar as revealing our wounds. Because if we're of the mindset of in the vein of, but not specifically, I don't see color or I don't see race, that's turning a blind eye. That's what's called bypassing. Spiritual bypassing, emotional bypassing, mental bypassing, cognitive bypassing. And it does nothing but cover up the wound, or put a band-aid on a broken leg. It's just making things worse, unless we actually take the time to sit and feel what needs to be healed. Then the wound is just going to become gangrenous. It might need to be amputated. But that brings me to the COVID part, which is, if you've ever, I recommend highly looking into TRE, trauma release exercises. And what my friend, a psychologist, she runs these classes, and what stuck with me, what felt like very serendipitous, very not so coincidental, was like how she worked a lot with veterans. I'm a veteran. I was in the U.S. Marines for 4 years, deployed twice to Afghanistan, faced my fair share of traumas over there. But what was really interesting about what she had to say as it pertains to releasing trauma was how during these exercises, this one soldier or Marine was in the position of trembling. That's how we release these stress hormones and the stuck and stagnated energies. The body starts to tremble. So if you're ever trembling, allow it. Please allow it. That's your body releasing stress. So this soldier was a point man during the Iraq War, and he was a door kicker. So he was on point. He was like the point man for his team. So anytime his team was going in to clear out some insurgents, let's say, he was the one to kick down the door and be the first to enter, which, if you can imagine, is a highly, highly stressful and traumatic event. So while he was releasing the trauma, his legs just started kicking and kicking and kicking, and he didn't know what was going on in the moment. But what was happening was his body was releasing, through the kicks, the trauma that he had stored in those moments during war. And so as I went through my bout with COVID, I remember laying in my bed, and just like in those trauma release exercises, I mean, when I went through the TRE with my friend Jenny, the psychologist, she said, over the course of the next few days, you may feel different things. Different people have, their fair share. But you may feel irritated. You may feel a lot of grief or sadness come up. You may feel awesome, inexplicably. And for me there was a lot of frustration and anger, because that's a lot of what I had stored in my body. But during COVID, that memory, that her saying that, came to mind as my, a lot of stress and tension started to open up and release from my shoulders. And I started just kind of like where I carried a lot of weight, and like when I was in the Marines, and it just started to like open up and free, and I was feeling a lot of that high intensity energy in my arms. Just wanted to, like, they kept punching, because like I also have taken martial arts, and a lot of my, let's say, healing process has been taken out on the brick walls in my house, and punching bags, and a tree in my backyard, who I deeply apologize to. But bringing this back to center, to the main point here of why I'm bringing you this information. COVID is helping those who need to release stored trauma to release stored trauma. And in releasing all this stuff that we're carrying, we're becoming energetically freer, lighter, which is to say that our collective planetary energy, right? Because COVID is all over the planet. It's helping us release a lot of this dense energy. And I would like to say that things are going to get better, but because hatred and ignorance can still be weaponized, things are going to get better or worse before they get better. Night's always darkest before dawn, kind of thing. That is to say, there's still a lot that needs to be released in the collective. As my acupuncturist would say, or had told me, this season that we're in right now is liver season, and the liver has a lot to do with processing anger. So if you notice, there's going to be a lot of energy, and if there's been blockages in our upbringing, as you know, I can speak firsthand, the word for me, a block to love and light ends up being depression or anger. Depression being, anger turned inward. And if you think about it on a more like practical, down to earth kind of way, we're entering into springtime, and that's when things come back to life. So there's a lot of like that energy of blossoming, and if there's any obstruction to the blossoming, that's when the flower, let's say, or the tree can get kind of deformed or misshapen. But all this to say, like, when we move through with this, the mantra or the mindset has to be one of, I am the unconditional love this moment needs. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're going through, be it depression, separation, insecurity, feeling unsafe, feeling ungrounded, always remember that your perspective, your viewpoint is one of unconditional love, which is to say awareness. Take everything away, all your beliefs, all of our dogmas, all of our habits, all of our opinions, and what's left is always awareness. That is said to be that which remains constant across our life. If you're into it across lifetimes, you are that which is aware of the present moment from where you are. And if you can remember in those moments